Thank you so much for taking time to host this and for the viewers to take time to watch more about our school committee candidates. So I am Liz Speakman. I am a mom to two young boys. They are 8 and 3. I'm also a clinical social worker with over 20 years of mental health experience, particularly focused around trauma. I've worked with big systems such as Mass General Hospital, currently with the City of Cambridge, helping systems understand the impacts of trauma and try to minimize those impacts. I've also done clinical work with individuals and groups to help them heal from trauma and become more resilient as a result. I'm a parent, and so I've been involved in many different parent groups, including being the co-chair of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Subcommittee of our citywide PTO. And have been able to learn firsthand what are some of the assets and challenges that we have through QPS. I work really hard. I've been at this campaign since March. One of the first groups that we reached out to was the Quincy Teachers Union, so we could better understand what are the needs of our educators, because if we don't understand what the educators need, then we certainly can't understand what our children need. And I've been working hard with them, and I'm really proud that our campaign has been living our values. We have an incredibly diverse team on our campaign. Our website, before it even launched, we had it translated into the top 4 languages that are spoken at QPS. We have materials in different languages. We have interpreters that come with us, and we pay them to do some interpreting so that we can speak to folks at community events in their own language. We're really trying to live the values that we want to see at QPS, and putting resources towards doing that and being as accessible as possible.
Candidate Speakman, this is Joe Murphy, and I have the first question for you.
Okay.
What are your priorities for the Quincy school system in the coming year?
Thank you for asking that, Joe. I love that question. So I've got a lot and I work hard, so I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get these things done. So the theme that I really believe that we need to focus on is belonging. I think that if our students and our young people don't have a sense of belonging and connectedness to their school and their educators, it's much harder for them to learn. And so there's several concrete ways that I think we can continue to create a sense of belonging for our young people. Certainly the social emotional impact of the pandemic needs to be a priority across the grade levels. We know that many of our children have been isolated, have faced anxiety, depression, have lost loved ones. And so if they're sitting in school and they're worried, they're anxious, they're depressed, they're not going to take in information, and the learning loss is just going to continue. And so I think really prioritizing the social emotional needs of our students has to be primary. We also have been advocating for family liaisons, which are positions that are meant to be a bridge between various linguistic and cultural communities and our schools. We know that there are many folks in our community for a variety of reasons who don't feel like they can advocate for their children or ask questions. And so having family liaisons who are representative of various communities and ideally parents who can be that bridge is something I've been advocating for and has been included in this year's budget. And so I'm excited to see that come to fruition. We also need a language line. Currently, staff need to sort of try to get a translator or find a paraprofessional who speaks a language. I think having a language line that many of our police have, where they can just call up a family and speak to them in their own language, is really going to increase not only accessibility, but that sense of belonging for all the families. I've been working with some of the teachers who have put a proposal together to create a diverse pipeline of educators from QPS graduates who want to stay working within the system that taught them. And so creating stipends for those students once they get their master's and they need to do some student teaching, that QPS can provide stipends to them to help keep them within our system. So I've been excited to work with some teachers to create a proposal for that. We also need to provide a raise for our teachers. I do a lot of training around trauma-informed systems, and one of the things we talk about is caring for the caregivers. And if I use the analogy of being on an airplane where you're told if you're traveling with someone you're caring for, you need to put on your air mask first, because if you can't breathe, you can't help them breathe. And it's the same thing with our teachers. If we're not not taking care of them, we're not taking care of our students. And similarly with our paraprofessionals, they are not currently receiving a living wage, from my opinion, and we need to increase that, make sure that all of the adults who are taking care of our children are adequately compensated for their time. The last one is play and food. For the parents of little ones, you know that your kid comes home with a full lunchbox because they wanted to have recess. And it's something I live with every day. And I hear so many parents say our kids shouldn't have to choose between eating lunch and going for recess. They get such little time for both of those things that many kids choose not to eat so they can have time to play. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference in families' lives when their kid comes home starving at the end of the day, or hasn't had enough time to get outside and play. So we need a sufficient time for both.
Mike, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was trying to get a hold of Liberty. We're having trouble. She didn't get the link, I guess. So we're trying to get the link to her. But the second question is, all right, you mentioned a few priorities there. Why and how did you select those issues or priorities?
My lived experience. These are not theoretical things for me. I have children in the system, and so the things that school committee decides affect my life. They affect my children and they affect our family. And as I mentioned, I was part of the Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Subcommittee and talked to so many families who just didn't have that sense of belonging with their neighborhood school, with their PTO, for a variety of reasons. Again, sometimes it was language, sometimes it was just cultural differences. But for me, I live with it. And so when I talk to parents on the playground or at the games, I hear what's on their minds. We've knocked on tons of doors and gotten a lot of feedback from people. But the thing that I think about too is I've been an advocate for the past 20 years, primarily around, like I said, trauma and domestic violence. And the things that I fight for are not things that are going to make my life better. They're things that are going to contribute to our community as a whole. And that's what I will do on school committee. I'm not going to advocate and fight for the things that just are going to help my children, but really the things that are going to affect those who are most marginalized and most vulnerable in our community. And those are the folks that I try to lift up their voices and better understand what their needs are and how we can all work together to make changes.
Hi, Liz. This is David Jacobs. I know I've seen you a few times out on the campaign trail. My camera is not working right now for some reason. I really appreciate your response to the last question, especially in regard to paraprofessionals or ESPs. I mean, I'm a public school teacher, and those people are my lifeline. They are my lifeline. So, but the question that I have for you is, in your own words, can you define critical race theory as it relates to, K-12 education? And can critical race theory be beneficial to our students? And why do you think it would be or would not be beneficial to our students? I know you're getting a lot of this at the door.
I sure am. Yes, I think people look at my literature and see equity, diversity, and inclusion and immediately get angry and start asking me about critical.
All them linked together, so it's like
right. Yes, and I think so. The critical race theory is an academic framework that was originated in law schools to help law students understand the impact of race and racism on the creation and implementation of laws. That is the fundamental definition of critical race theory. That is not the sort of understanding of what critical race theory is. And many people that I've talked to on the doors, when I ask them what it is, they tell me that it's anti-white. It's teaching our kids to hate white people and teaching white children to hate themselves. If that's your definition, then I don't think that's something we should be teaching anywhere. That's certainly not my definition of critical race theory, but if that's what people are asking me, should we be teaching our children to hate white people and for white kids to hate themselves? No, I don't know who would advocate for that, but I certainly don't. I do think that we operate and live within a society that has systemic racism, and that we do need to understand at developmentally appropriate levels the impacts that racism has on all of us. Certainly, studies have shown that little children, babies even, show racial preference for their own race and understand the difference between races. And so if we ignore that, we're going to just continue going the way that we've been going. We all agree that racism is wrong. And in order to change it, we actually have to proactively fight against it. And so I think teaching diversity, equity, inclusion, anti-racism, celebrating different cultures, having an understanding of the complexity of our history in this country is really a critical skill for all of our students to have, and that we certainly can do that in developmentally appropriate ways for all of our students. And so do I think that critical race theory and its sort of understanding now of being anti-white should be taught? No. And I think there's lots of other ways that we can still incorporate the understanding of how race and racism has been embedded in our country since its inception, and how we can work to try to change that collectively as a community.
All right, question 4. All right, how would you intend to balance the needs of the taxpayers with those of our school children?
Oh, I don't think they're different. I don't think the needs of our children are different from the needs of our taxpayers. Certainly many taxpayers have children. Many taxpayers have grandchildren, have nephews and nieces. Whenever I go to the door and someone says, "Oh, I don't know anything about school committee. I don't have kids in the system," I always ask, "Do you have any loved ones? Do you know any children? Are there children in your neighborhood?" The way that we treat our children, I believe, is a marker of our values as a community. And so if we prioritize the health and safety and wellness of our children and make sure that we're putting their academic needs, their wellness needs as a priority in our community, then we are showing our values of really bringing a sense of connectedness to our community. And so, I think that our city councils, as they set the budget, they do an excellent job, and they're very thoughtful in making sure that the priority areas are set. And the school committee has an important role of making sure that there's accountability within the system, and that the money is spent in a way that it was intended to. And so I think if we see it as putting money into our schools is in the best interest of all of us as taxpayers and as community members, we're going to see incredible dividends as we move forward.
All right, how are we doing on time?
This is a time check. Liz, you have a little under about 2 minutes left. So would you like to field another question or just go right to your closing statement?
Sure, I'll try.
All right, Mike, ask away.
All right, as a school committee member, you will have to make many some budgetary decisions. How would you define your priorities on the next school budget?
Well, certainly, putting our children first, centering the needs of our children is really the priority in everything that I do, my home life and my professional life, as well as school committee. And so making sure that the basic needs for our children are met is a priority. And, I know that we have some federal funding coming in the next, that will cover the next 3 years of many of the priorities that we have around social, emotional health and technology and the health and safety of our children. And so certainly grateful to the federal government for ensuring that our students are prioritized as we emerge from the pandemic. But, if hard decisions have to be made, then I'm prepared to do that as a member of a school committee. And seeing where are the places that we can, cut around the edges, but make sure that we're keeping the core focus on our children and what's best for them.
Okay, and that takes us to right about 14 minutes. So you have a minute left for your closing statement.
Great, thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm a proud Democrat and have been since I registered to vote when I turned 18. I've been really grateful for all the advocacy that you've been doing and would be thrilled to be a member of this school committee. I think having a clinical social worker with deep experience in trauma is really critical as a need that we have for our school committee now. And that's a voice that I would bring. I've been an advocate for 20 years and I'm known as a truth teller, but with diplomacy. I know how to work within big systems and get things done, work collaboratively to come to solutions that are going to work well for everybody. These are all skills and talents and experience that I think would serve us well for our school committee. So I humbly ask for your vote on November 2nd.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for